He set the mower down on the strip of dry dirt between the driveways and pressed his palm against the metal to steady it. The engine ticked as it cooled. A ribbon of cut grass clung to his boot. He scraped it off on the curb, careful not to look toward the house with the blue shutters. The morning was thin and pale. A dog barked somewhere 2 streets over, then stopped. He wiped his forehead with a folded handkerchief and reached for the gas can. The cap was stiff. He turned it slowly, letting the resistance ease in his fingers. The smell rose sharp and clean. He filled the tank without spilling. When he straightened, he held his lower back a moment, waiting for the small heat there to settle. The porch door next door stayed closed. The wind moved through the maple leaves and laid them down again. He pulled the starter cord. It caught on the second try. The blade began its low, steady turn, a sound that filled the space between the houses and kept him company. He walked the same path he walked every Thursday, straight lines, half a wheel over on the return. At the far edge, he paused to lift the front wheels and turn. The grass there was thinner, the soil showing through in places. He slowed, letting the blade take less at a time. The window above the sink held a dish rack and a single white plate set to dry. He kept his eyes on the line ahead. The sun moved higher, warming the back of his neck. Sweat gathered under the brim of his cap and traced its way down beside his ear. He stopped once to empty the bag into the paper sack he brought with him, tamping it down with the flat of his hand. The rhythm returned as soon as he started again, a pace his legs remembered even when the rest of him did not. A car passed without slowing. The mail truck came and went. The flag on his own porch shifted once, then hung still. He did not check the time. He knew the length of the yard by the number of turns. On the last pass, he cut the engine early and let the mower roll the final few feet. The quiet came back in a rush. He stood with his hands on the handle and listened to the ticking metal, to a screen door somewhere, to a radio low and far away. He brushed clippings from his trousers and bent to pull a weed near the step. The root held fast. He worked it loose with 2 fingers, patient, until it came free with a small, soft sound. He laid it in the sack with the rest. At the spigot, he turned the hose and rinsed the grass from the wheels. Water darkened the concrete and ran toward the gutter. He watched it carry a green thread along. When he shut the valve, the sudden silence felt like a door closing. He coiled the hose as he always did, loop over loop, each one even. The porch next door stayed empty. A curtain moved, then rested. He lifted the sack and set it by the bins. The lid of the mower clicked when he folded the handle. For a moment he kept his hand there, feeling the faint tremor that lingered in the metal. He looked at the strip he had cut, the clean edge along the walk, the small curve around the flower bed where nothing had come up yet. The soil was smooth, raked the way he liked it. He took off his cap and ran his hand through his hair, flattening it again before he put the cap back on. A truck door slammed down the block. Someone laughed, a short burst. He rolled the mower across the narrow path to his own yard and left it by the shed. The lock stuck as it often did. He jiggled it twice before it gave. Inside, the smell of old wood and oil settled around him. He set the can on the shelf and wiped his hands on a rag that had once been white. On the workbench lay a small tin of screws, sorted by size, and a photograph turned face down. He did not turn it over. He closed the shed door with his shoulder and stood a while in the shade, letting his eyes adjust. The heat had begun to gather in the street. The asphalt held a dull shine. A bicycle leaned against the fence next door, its front tire turned slightly as if it had stopped mid-thought. He picked up the paper from his own steps, folded it without reading, and set it on the table by the door. In the kitchen, the clock made its careful sound. He filled a glass from the tap and drank it in 4 steady swallows, then stood with the glass in his hand, looking through the window at the yard he had just left. The line between the properties was hard to see now. The cut ran straight through it. He rinsed the glass and set it upside down on the towel. A fly circled once and settled on the sill. He watched it rub its front legs together, then lift and go. In the front room, the chair by the window waited where it always did. He lowered himself into it with care, feeling the cushion give and hold. The house made its small daytime sounds, pipes, a settling board, the distant hum of someone else's television. He rested his hands on his knees and closed his eyes for a count that had no number. When he opened them, the light had shifted on the floor. He rose again, slow, and went to the sink to wash the last of the green from under his nails. The water ran clear. He dried his hands and stood there a moment, listening to the quiet that followed him from room to room. On the counter lay a set of keys and a note from the pharmacy. He turned it over without reading and slid it beneath the keys. Outside, a lawn sprinkler began its steady arc, water tapping the leaves in a measured way. He moved to the front door and opened it just enough to feel the air. The yard next door held its new lines, bright under the noon sun. He rested his hand on the frame and stood there, not stepping out, not calling across. A curtain lifted again in the blue window and fell. He watched until it was still. Then he closed the door with the same care he used on the mower handle, easing it into place so the latch would not sound. The house received him again, dim and cool. He crossed the room and sat once more, his gaze on the square of light where the yard had been cut. He left his cap on. The clock kept its patient time. In the space between ticks, he could almost hear the blade turning, low and even, moving forward without hurry. He leaned back and let the sound stay with him a while. The afternoon light thinned along the wall, touching the photograph on the bench without turning it over. He watched the dust drift through it, each mote rising and falling like breath he did not measure. On Fridays, he did not go outside until the shade had crossed the walkway. The morning belonged to small repairs, a loose hinge on the hall closet. A button on a shirt he no longer wore but could not put away. He sat at the table with a shallow dish of screws and a screwdriver with a worn handle. The metal turned under his wrist in short, careful movements. When the hinge aligned, he opened and closed the door 3 times, listening for the catch. It held. He folded the shirt and set it back in the drawer with the others, all of them facing the same way. The fabric had thinned at the elbows. He pressed the seam flat with his thumb. In the drawer beneath lay a stack of envelopes held with a rubber band. He slid the drawer shut without lifting them. The refrigerator hummed, then fell quiet. He poured himself a bowl of cereal and ate it standing up, the spoon striking the ceramic in a light rhythm that matched the clock. By late afternoon, the street carried a different sound. School buses, the rise and fall of voices, the quick slam of car doors. The bicycle next door appeared again, fallen this time on its side. He watched it through the front window for a while, then put on his shoes and stepped out. The air held a thin sweetness from somewhere, cut grass and something blooming out of sight. He walked to the edge of his own yard and stopped. The line he had cut the day before had softened, the blades lifting back toward the light. He bent to pull another weed at the border. When he straightened, the porch next door had filled with a pair of shoes set close together, smaller than his. Mud dried along the soles. He stood long enough to read the pattern there, the way it had cracked and flaked. The screen door opened and closed once, a quick motion, and he looked down at his hands as if he had been called. He went back inside and rinsed the sink, though it was already clean. He dried the counter with a towel and hung it with its corner aligned to the tile. In the bedroom, he opened the top drawer and took out a small bottle of pills. He shook 2 into his palm and held them there, white against the lines of his skin. A glass of water waited on the nightstand. He swallowed without sitting, then capped the bottle and returned it to its place. Evenings came slowly. He ate at the same hour, a plate warmed in the oven, a slice of bread. The television stayed dark. The radio sometimes spoke in a low voice from the shelf, a station that played songs he did not follow. He kept the volume just above the sound of the pipes. Afterward, he washed the plate and set it to dry, one more white circle beside the first. Through the open window, he could hear the younger man next door moving about, a cupboard closing, the scrape of a chair. Once a cough that lingered. The first time it happened, the older man had paused with the dishcloth in his hand, waiting for the sound to return. It did not. He wrung the cloth and hung it over the faucet. The light from the neighbor's kitchen fell in a square on the side yard. He watched the shadow cross it and leave. On Sundays, he trimmed the edge along the curb with a pair of shears that had belonged to someone else. The handles were wrapped in tape, the blades kept sharp. He moved along the concrete on his knees, snipping each blade that leaned out of place. Cars slowed as they passed, then moved on. The work required a close eye and a steady wrist. He liked the way the line appeared under his hand, precise, a boundary made without offense. Sometimes the younger man came out while he worked, carrying a bag of groceries or a cardboard box. Their paths never crossed. The older man would pause to wipe the blades with a cloth, giving the other time to reach the door. Once, the younger man set a sack down on the steps and stood there, looking at the yard as if trying to see what had changed. He lifted his head slightly, a motion that could have been a nod or simply a stretch of the neck. The older man bent closer to the curb and did not look up. On the 3rd week of the month, the trash bins went to the street. The younger man's bin often leaned, one wheel stuck in the crack. Before dawn, when the air still held the nights cool, the older man would step out and right it. He did it without turning on the porch light. The plastic lid made a soft sound when it settled. He returned to his own steps and waited for the truck to come, the hydraulic lift whining, the bin tipped and set back in its place. The mail arrived in the late morning. The older man sorted it on the table, stacking the envelopes by size. The younger man's letters sometimes slipped into his box, the numbers on the street not far apart. He would carry them across and slide them through the slot in the door. The first time his hand had hovered a moment over the brass, the cool of it seeping into his skin. He let go and stepped back before the letter touched the floor inside. The weather turned warmer. The maple cast a deeper shade. Dandelions came up in the thinner patches and he knelt to take them out, twisting the root free so they would not return. He filled a bucket and emptied it at the far corner of the yard where the soil lay bare. The younger man's window stayed open more often now. A curtain lifted and fell in a steady breath. One afternoon a package sat on the neighbor's steps, the tape bright in the sun. He noticed it when he came out with the hose. It had been there the day before. He watered his own beds first, moving the spray in a slow arc, letting the water sink. The soil darkened and held the shape of the stream. The package remained where it was. He shut the valve and stood with the hose in his hand, watching the street. A delivery truck turned at the corner and went the other way. He crossed the line between the yards without looking at it. The boards of the steps creaked under his weight. He set the package inside the screen and closed it with care, making sure the latch caught. The house held its quiet. He did not call out. On the way back, he noticed a crack in the walkway, a thin line where grass had begun to push through. He bent and pinched it out, leaving the concrete clean. That night the cough came again, longer, catching at the end as if it had nowhere to go. He stood by the sink with his hands in the water, the soap gone thin between his fingers. The sound stopped, and the pipes in his own house took it up, a low echo. He dried his hands and went to the front room. The chair held him the way it always did. He looked at the square of light next door, then at the dark where his own yard lay. On Wednesday, he took the mower out earlier than usual. The grass had grown fast with the heat. He checked the blade with his thumb, feeling for the nick that had appeared last summer. It was still there, a small roughness. He tightened the bolt with a wrench and set the bag in place. The engine started on the first pull. The sound moved ahead of him into the bright air. Halfway through the yard, he stopped and leaned on the handle, the breath coming shorter than he liked. He counted to 10, then to 10 again, not looking at the house. The porch door opened. He heard it before he saw it, the hinge giving a dry note. Footsteps crossed the boards and paused at the top of the steps. The older man kept his gaze on the line of cut grass at his feet. A voice came out, not loud. "You don't have to do that." He lifted his head then, slowly, as if the motion belonged to someone else. The younger man stood with one hand on the railing, the other hanging at his side. He wore a T-shirt with a dark patch at the chest, damp from the heat. His face held a look that was not quite a smile, not quite a frown. Between them the mower idled, a low, steady sound. "It's fine," the older man said, the words shaped by a throat unused to them. He lowered the handle and the blade took the grass again, the line moving forward. When he reached the end, he turned the engine off and the quiet returned, thicker now. The younger man had come down the steps. He stood at the edge of the walk, looking at the clean curve around the bed. "I was going to get to it," he said, not in defense, not in apology. The older man nodded once, a small motion. The heat pressed around them. A bee moved between the clover heads and drifted away. "You don't have to," the younger man said again, softer this time, as if the words were meant for the space between them rather than for the man himself. The older man lifted the bag from the mower and tied the paper sack. His fingers worked the knot without looking. "It's on my way," he said, though the path he took had not changed in years. He set the sack by the bins and wiped his hands on the handkerchief he kept folded in his pocket. They stood a moment longer, the distance between them not far, not close. The younger man shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "Thanks," he said finally, the word landing on the air like something placed on a table. The older man picked up the mower and turned toward his own yard. The engine did not start on the first pull this time. He tried again, slower, and it caught. The sound filled the space again, and he walked his lines as he always did, the pattern holding him. When he finished, the porch next door was empty. The shoes had moved. The window above the sink held two plates now, side by side, catching the late light. He rinsed the wheels at the spigot and coiled the hose, each loop even. His hands trembled once and then were still. Inside, he sat in the chair and listened to the clock. The word the younger man had spoken, "thanks," remained in the room, quiet, without weight. He did not turn on the radio. He did not reach for the photograph. He watched the light move along the floor until it touched the leg of the table and climbed it slowly, as if time had found a new way to pass. The next Thursday came with a low sky and air that held the promise of rain without giving any. He brought the mower out later than usual. The grass had grown uneven in the humidity, patches lifting higher where the soil stayed damp. He checked the bag twice, pressing the seams with his thumb. When he crossed the narrow strip between the yards, the younger man's car sat at an angle in the driveway. The front wheel turned too sharply, as if it had been left that way without noticing. The porch door was open. A pair of shoes lay on their sides near the threshold. He began along the far edge, the place he always started, letting the engine settle into its familiar pace. Halfway through the first line, the cough came again, from inside the house, deeper this time, a rough sound that did not end cleanly. He slowed, the blade taking less with each step. The cough broke, returned, then fell into a silence that stretched. He finished the row and turned. The window above the sink was open wider than before. The curtain hung still. On the table inside, he could see a glass half full and a folded cloth beside it. He kept moving, the pattern carrying him forward. At the second turn, he cut the engine and stood with his hands on the handle, listening. A chair scraped. Something fell, not heavy, a short, hollow sound. He waited for another movement, a voice, the shift of feet. The quiet held. He set the mower down where it stood and walked toward the steps without thinking to wipe his boots. The boards creaked under him. He knocked once on the frame with his knuckles, the way he had knocked on doors all his life, a rhythm learned long ago. No answer came. He pushed the screen open and stepped inside, his cap still on his head. The room smelled faintly of coffee gone cold. A plate sat in the sink with a fork resting across it. The younger man was on the floor near the table, one shoulder against the leg of the chair, his hand at his chest as if he had been trying to hold something in place. His eyes were open, not focused. The older man set his cap on the counter and knelt beside him, the floor hard under his knees. "Hey," he said, the word quiet, as if he were waking someone from a shallow sleep. The younger man blinked once. His mouth moved without sound. The older man reached for the glass on the table and brought it down, tipping it carefully so the water touched the younger man's lips. A small swallow came. He set the glass aside and took out the handkerchief, folding it once before pressing it into the younger man's hand. "Breathe," he said, the way he had been told once, the way he had told others, his voice low and steady. "Slow." The younger man's chest rose in a shallow motion, then fell. The older man looked around for the phone and saw it on the counter. He stood, his knees protesting, and dialed with fingers that found the numbers without searching. He spoke into the receiver in a voice that did not change, giving the address, the simple facts. He listened, said yes, and set the phone back in its cradle. He returned to the floor and sat with his back against the cabinet, his shoulder touching the younger man's arm. The contact was light, the weight shared without comment. Outside, the mower stood in the yard where he had left it, a silent shape in the tall grass. "Stay," he said, not sure if the word was for the other man or for himself. The younger man's breathing had found a rhythm, still shallow but steady. His eyes had closed. The older man watched the movement of his chest, counting without numbers the way he had counted many things. Sirens came from far away and grew, the sound moving through the neighborhood in a straight line. He did not move when they stopped in front of the house. The door opened with a quick swing and voices filled the room, efficient, practiced. Hands touched the younger man's wrist, his neck. Questions were asked and answered in short phrases. The older man stepped back, his shoulder leaving the place it had held. They lifted the younger man onto a stretcher. The cloth fell from his hand to the floor. The older man picked it up and folded it again, once, twice, the edges aligned. He set it on the table beside the glass. One of the men in uniform looked at him and nodded, a small acknowledgement that asked for nothing more. When the room emptied, the quiet returned in pieces. He stood by the counter with his cap in his hands. The plate in the sink had a smear of something along its edge. He turned the faucet and rinsed it, the water running until it cleared. He set the fork to dry beside it, the tines catching the light. The chair lay on its side where it had been knocked. He righted it and pushed it under the table. He went back to the yard and shut off the mower's fuel, though it had been still for a long time. The grass around it stood bent where the wheels had pressed it. He pulled the starter once, not to start it, just to feel the resistance, the way it returned to his hand. He finished the lines without the bag, letting the clippings fall where they would. The sky lowered, the first drops of rain touching the dust and darkening it. By the time he rinsed the wheels, the rain had begun in earnest. He did not hurry. The water ran down his sleeves and into his cuffs. The paper sack softened where it stood by the bins. He carried it under the porch and set it against the wall. The younger man's car remained in the drive, the front wheels still turned. Inside his own house, he left the door open for a while, the rain moving in a fine mist across the threshold. He sat in the chair with his cap on the table and listened to the steady fall. The clock kept time beneath it. On the bench, the photograph lay face down, the corner damp where the air had reached it. That night, he did not eat. He made tea and forgot to drink it. The cup cooled beside his hand. The square of light next door did not come on. He went to the window and stood with his hand on the frame, the rain tracing thin lines down the glass. In the morning, the yard next door held the clean-cut lines, darker now from the storm. The porch was empty. A neighbor from across the street stood at the curb and looked at the house for a moment, then walked on. The older man took the bins out and set them straight. He lifted the younger man's lid and saw it was nearly empty. He closed it gently and wheeled it to the street with his own. The days that followed moved in their usual shapes, but the sounds had changed. The cough was gone. The scrape of the chair did not come. Once in the afternoon, a car pulled into the driveway and a woman stepped out, her hair tied back, a bag in her hand. She went inside and came out again with the bag fuller than before. She looked at the yard as she passed, at the line along the curve around the bed. Her gaze moved to the older man's house and rested there a moment, not searching, simply taking in the fact of it. On the third day, the younger man returned. The car came slowly up the street and stopped with its wheels straight this time. The older man was in his yard with the shears, trimming the edge. He did not look up when the door opened. Footsteps crossed the boards and paused. "I'm back," the younger man said, as if announcing it to the yard itself. His voice was thinner than before, the words measured. The older man finished the blade in his hand and wiped the shears with the cloth. He rose to his feet and turned. The younger man stood with one hand on the railing, the other holding a small paper bag. A band of white showed at his wrist where the hospital band had been. His face held the color of someone who had been under bright lights for too long. They looked at each other across the narrow space, the air between them carrying the smell of wet soil and cut grass. "You did the inside," the younger man said, his eyes moving toward the window where the dish rack held the plate and the fork. The older man nodded once. "The sink," he said. The word felt new. "Thank you," the younger man said, not like before, not a word, set down and left. It stayed with them, moving a little, finding a place to rest. The older man shifted the shears from one hand to the other. "You should sit," he said, the suggestion plain, without weight. The younger man lowered himself onto the top step. He held the paper bag in his lap. The older man remained standing, the shears hanging at his side. A breeze moved through the maple and laid the leaves down again. "I thought it was just the heat," the younger man said after a while, looking at the line of the curb. "And the stairs." The older man did not answer. He watched a line of ants cross the concrete, each one carrying something too large for its body. "They kept me," the younger man went on, "for a couple of nights' tests." He tapped the bag once with his fingers, a light motion. "Pills." The older man nodded. He knew the shape of that bag, the weight of it. "You didn't have to go in," the younger man said. "Most people wouldn't." The older man looked at his hands, at the small cuts along the knuckles, the green that had not quite washed away. "You were on the floor," he said, as if that were the whole of it. They sat there, one on the step, one standing with the shears, the yard between them newly cut, the lines clear. A car passed and the driver lifted a hand in a gesture that belonged to no one in particular. The sky had cleared. The sun moved along the edge of the roof and down the siding in a slow, bright path. After a while, the older man set the shears on the grass and went to his own porch. He came back with 2 glasses of water, the rims catching the light. He handed one across. The younger man took it with both hands. They drank without looking at each other. The water was cool, the day already warm again. When the glasses were empty, the older man held his for a moment, then took the younger man's and set both on the step beside him. "You keep the line straight," the younger man said, not a question. "It helps," the older man answered. "With what?" He considered the yard, the way the cut lay against the uncut, the clear edge. "Knowing where to stop," he said. The younger man nodded as if he understood, though there was nothing to understand that could be said. He leaned back against the railing and closed his eyes for a moment. The older man watched the rise and fall of his chest, the rhythm finding itself again. The next week, the mower stayed in the shed until afternoon. The heat had settled into the street early, a wide stillness that pressed the sounds down. When he brought the machine out, he noticed the younger man's front door already open, the screen latched in place. A chair had been moved to the porch, turned slightly toward the yard. A folded blanket lay across its back, though the day did not call for one. He began along the far edge, the way he always did. The engine took a moment to find its even tone. The grass was thick where the rain had held. As he moved through the first line, he could feel the younger man's presence without looking, the way a light shifts behind you when someone opens a door. He kept his eyes on the strip ahead, the wheel placed half over the last pass. "Morning," the younger man said, not loud enough to cross the yard on its own. The word rested in the air and reached him anyway. He lifted one hand from the handle without stopping the mower. It was not a wave, only a brief rise, the fingers opening and closing again. The engine filled the space between them and carried the rest away. At the turn, he shut the blade off and let the quiet come back. The younger man sat with a glass in his hand, the blanket still across the chair, though it had slid to one side. His feet were bare. He had placed them flat on the boards as if testing their hold. "You're early," the older man said. "Couldn't sleep," the younger man answered. He did not add anything to that. The older man did not ask. A small table had appeared beside the chair, an old thing with a water ring near its edge. On it sat the paper bag of pills and a book turned face down. The spine had been cracked in several places, the pages fanned as if they had been held open by a thumb that rested too long. "I was going to try," the younger man said, looking toward the mower, then at the yard as if measuring it with his eyes. "You don't have to," the older man said, the words returning in a different shape now, not refusal, not insistence. He picked up the handle and the blade took the grass again. The lines went down as they always had, each one beside the last. At the edge near the flower bed, he slowed and lifted the front wheels to turn. When he straightened, the younger man had stood up. He held the railing with one hand and stepped down to the walk, the movement careful, each foot placed as if the ground might shift. "Let me do the curb," he said. "Just the curb." The older man considered the shears leaning against his own steps, the tape at the handles, the blades kept sharp. He nodded once and set the mower to one side. The younger man crossed the narrow strip between the yards and took the shears in his hands. He weighed them a moment, testing the spring, opening and closing them twice without cutting. "You keep them clean," he said. "It helps," the older man answered. The younger man knelt at the edge of the concrete. The first snip came slow, the blades finding the line. He moved along in short sections, pausing often, his breath measured. The older man stood a little back, not close enough to crowd, not far enough to leave. The sun moved across the roof and down the siding, touching the younger man's shoulders and sliding away again. A car passed. The driver slowed this time and lifted a hand that was meant for them. The older man raised his own in return. The younger man did not see. He kept his eyes on the line, the blades of grass that leaned where they should not. After a while, the older man went to the spigot and filled 2 glasses. He set them on the step between the properties. The water caught the light and held it. When the younger man finished the short stretch, he sat back on his heels and reached for one without looking, as if he had known it would be there. They drank. The shears lay across the concrete between them. "You were in the service," the younger man said, not as a question. He had seen the cap once, the small pin on the older man's jacket on a cold morning when the wind had lifted the collar. The older man rested his hands on his knees. "A long time ago," he said. "My father was," the younger man said. "Different place, different years." He lifted the glass and watched the last of the water slide down its side. "He used to cut the grass in straight lines. He said it made the week make sense." The older man nodded. The line at the curb lay clean under the sun, the small clippings gathered like a border. "He died in March," the younger man said. He did not look up when he spoke. "Back in Ohio. I came here in April, the job, the house, all at once." He set the glass down and picked up the shears again, then set them back without using them. "I thought if I kept moving it would settle." The older man watched the ants cross the concrete again, the same path, the same careful carry. He felt the weight of the handkerchief in his pocket, the fold of it against his thigh. "My wife," he said, the word resting in the air as if it had not been used in a long time. He did not say her name. 3 years now." He looked at the yard, at the place where the soil held the curve of the bed she had planted. Nothing had come up there this season. "She used to sit on that step and tell me when the line was off." The younger man smiled once, a small movement that did not reach his eyes and did not need to. "They notice things," he said. "They do," the older man answered. The quiet that followed was not empty. It held the sound of a sprinkler down the block, the low call of a bird from the wire. The 2 glasses on the step caught the light and gave it back. In the days that followed, the work began to divide itself without being spoken. On Thursdays, the older man still brought the mower across and cut the wide lines. On Sundays, the younger man took the shears and did the curb, moving slowly, stopping often, but finishing the length. When the trash bins went out before dawn, the older man righted them as he always had. In the afternoon, the younger man would wheel them back, setting them close to the house so the older man would not have to cross the yard again. Sometimes they sat on the porch with the small table between them, 2 glasses of water, the book turned face down, the paper bag folded smaller as the pills were taken. They did not fill the time with words. A question would come and be answered in a few lines, then the quiet would return, not a thing to avoid. On a cool morning in late September, the older man brought out a second chair. He set it on his own porch at first, then carried it across and placed it beside the first. Blanket had been replaced by a sweater, folded over the back. The younger man touched the arm of the chair as if testing its strength before he sat. The maple began to drop its leaves in thin yellow pieces that lay on the cut grass like paper. The older man took the rake and moved through the yard in wide arcs, the sound of the tines over the ground a steady whisper. The younger man gathered the leaves into a pile near the curb, his movements still careful but surer than before. "You ever think of leaving?" The younger man asked once, looking at the street where the buses came and went. The older man leaned on the rake. "No," he said, "not really." "Me neither," the younger man said, and they both looked at the houses across the way, at the same curtains that had been there for years, at the same flag that shifted once and hung still. On a gray afternoon, the older man went into the shed and turned the photograph over. He wiped the corner with the edge of his sleeve and set it on the workbench where the light could reach it. He stood with his hand on the wood, the smell of oil and old paint around him. When he came back out, the younger man was on the porch with 2 cups of tea, steam rising in thin lines. "For you," the younger man said, and held one out. They drank it slowly. The tea had been made too strong. Neither of them mentioned it. The first frost came early that year. The grass lay flat and silver in the morning. The older man walked to the edge of the yard and stood with his hands in his pockets. The mower stayed in the shed. The younger man came out with a scarf around his neck and stamped his feet once on the boards. "No more lines," the younger man said, looking at the ground. "For a while," the older man answered. They stood there, the two of them, the yards running together without the cut to mark them. The curb held its clean edge from the last trim. The bins were set straight. The small table waited with two glasses turned upside down. The older man reached into his pocket and took out the handkerchief. He unfolded it once and smoothed it on his knee, then folded it again and set it on the step between them. The younger man picked it up and held it a moment before placing it beside the glasses. The street moved in its usual way. A car passed. A child's voice carried from the corner and fell. The maple stood with its branches bare. They sat until the light thinned and the houses across the way began to turn their lamps on one by one. When the older man rose, he did not take the chair back. He left it where it was and went inside his own house, closing the door with the same care as always. In the morning there were two sets of footprints on the frost, crossing the narrow strip between the yards and returning again. The line where the grass would grow back waited under the cold.